Bonjour, relatives. Cree Rose Indignicas. My name is Cree Rose Duker. I am an enrolled member of the Chippewa Cree tribe, but I'm currently living in my partner's hometown, which is Casa Grande, Arizona, the homelands of the Tohono O'odham and Peepash peoples. And I'm the program manager with community engagement for Native Governance Center. And I'm just really excited to welcome you all today and thank you for taking some time to join us for this webinar session. For those of you not familiar with us, Native Governance Center is a Native-led nonprofit, and we're really all about supporting Native nations in strengthening their governance systems and their capacity to exercise their sovereignty. And to share just a little bit about what we do serve different Native nations directly through our programs like tribal governance support, which includes support for newly elected leaders in governance, tribal civics. We also have an incredible tribal finance program that works directly with Native nations. And we're really well known for what we call our Native Nation Rebuilders program. And that is an individual leadership program for really grassroots change makers throughout our region. And finally, I'm here representing community engagement, where we provide a lot of free webinars and education events like this one. And in addition to that, we have a great online free resources library too. So we encourage you to just kind of stay in touch and learn more after today if you're interested. And you can go do that by checking out our website, which is nativegov.org, or by giving us a follow on social media at nativegov. But today's virtual event is Better Together, and it's focused on partnerships in governance across Indian country. So we're going to really try to explore the relationship between different governments, those city, state, federal, and tribal governments, and really how we can best work together in a way that's supporting sovereignty and self-governance. We're going to be learning practices and sharing some stories, thanks to a panel of our Indigenous leaders today. And they have a really wide variety of experience in governance. And this is actually the third and final event in our little mini series here, focused on the power of positive partnerships. And so we'll be sharing the recordings for all of these sessions soon. And we're going to create a written resource guide based off of all the incredible information shared from our panelists and knowledge from our staff as well. And before we kind of begin the content today, I just want to address a couple of housekeeping things. First, because this is a Zoom webinar, you'll want to use the Q&A function if you have any questions you'd like to submit for our speakers. We are going to transition over to the live audience Q&A around 12:50 or 12:55 Central Time. And we'll also be having a good panel conversation before that. Today's webinar is being closed captioned, so if you want to turn those on, you can do that by using the button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And finally, we are going to start off today's session with just a really short presentation on partnership basics. And then we're going to move into that panel conversation, which I know we're all really looking forward to. And so when we're thinking about kind of partnerships and specifically partnerships in governance, today's speakers are going to be sharing their own experiences, as I mentioned, and knowledge around partnerships when it comes to working with Native nations. But as an organization, we also have some kind of general best practices that we like to share when it comes to partnership as well. And if you've attended either of the previous sessions, these might sound a little bit familiar, but some of our best practices when it comes to partnership include doing your own research. So ideally, before partnering or reaching out, you're taking some time to learn more about that Native nation that you're looking to partner with. You're looking for opportunities to learn directly from that Native nation and their leaders, and really trying to understand more of their context. So, digging into the history of that nation, understanding what the nation's priorities are now, what some of their biggest accomplishments are, and maybe what some of their needs are as well. And then we also want you to get into a good headspace. So just considering, are you in the right headspace to do this kind of work? Understanding that although you might be the expert in your field, you're not going to be the expert in this Native nation and their governance. And so just kind of having a good mindset, having qualities like humility, openness, patience, and an asset-based mentality are really crucial for building strong relationships. And when it comes to working with Native nations, you also want to be kind of willing to pause, pivot, or maybe even abandon your idea because it's going to be based on that Native nation and it might just not fit in with their plans or what they want to do. And then you also need to be working at the speed of community, even if it doesn't align with your speed or maybe with your original timeline. When it comes to working with Native nations, we really want folks to think about how they can demonstrate a willingness to invest in this longer term process, because that's really what it takes to build trust, build relationships in Indian country, and really make these partnerships thrive and make them something that is sustainable. And we also want you to keep in mind that every community is different and each community has their own ideas for solutions. So if your plan doesn't look to embrace or leverage existing community solutions and resources, it probably needs some refinement. And then we also want to really uplift this idea of respecting sovereignty. And so sovereignty is the natural right of a people to govern themselves. It means in this case that Native nations are operating as independent nations within settler occupied lands. And it's really thinking about the future. So it guarantees Native nations the right to design and control their own futures. And when we think about respecting sovereignty, this is a really important one when it comes to government relationships. You want to have that government to government relationship, go in with your leadership, meeting with their leadership, and really thinking about respecting sovereignty in terms of not only the process and how you're going about connecting with a Native nation, but also some of the policy and things that maybe you uphold in your work that you're doing. And while we can't cover it all today, there are some things we wanted to make sure folks had some context for when it comes to Native nations and our governance systems. So it's important to keep in mind that tribal leaders, just like other elected leaders, are really elected and then held accountable by their citizens. They are making policy decisions, managing intergovernmental relationships, stewarding really important tribal resources, and so much more. And their leadership roles are really rooted both in political systems, but also in their unique cultural values that connect to their nation. And I think maybe unlike other elected leaders, being an elected tribal leader is a little bit different because you are essentially working 24/7. Um, Unlike other elected leadership positions, folks maybe know you a little bit more. They know your family, they know where you live, they have your cell phone number. So it's a lot harder to get away from work. And there's also that expectation that as a tribal leader, you're really responsible for the well-being of your peoples. And so while that does mean doing these really important meetings with federal and state governments, it also means taking care of elders and making sure folks have propane in the winter. So their leadership duties are really wide and really expansive. And when we think about leadership terms and election processes, those really do vary from tribe to tribe. And that's important to keep in mind because governance is something that is absolutely not one size fits all. So each Native nation is going to have their own election laws, processes, and it maybe will look similar to the US system. And in some ways, it will look very different. Today, we see that many Native nations are blending their traditional governance practices with contemporary systems, and some include constitutions, codes, and courts, while others maybe use more customary governance that's rooted in oral tradition or getting community consensus. Some Native nations hold annual elections while others have longer cycles. And participating in tribal elections is a really cool direct exercise of our tribal sovereignty. And it's important to remember again that our Native nations are not homogenous. Each one of us has our own unique history, culture, and government structure. And you want to keep that in mind when you're looking to engage, because each nation will look for that engagement a little bit differently. So, understanding tribal governance is really essential for building those respectful, lasting partnerships. And then while there has been a lot of harm caused by governance systems when it comes to working with Native nations, we are now seeing a lot of really powerful forward-facing partnerships today that are doing their best to center sovereignty, have a lot of respect, and really share power between government systems. And so before we move into our conversation, I did just want to uplift some positive partnerships across governance that are happening now. One really big one that I think is a cool one, just because I don't see it in a lot of other areas, comes from Minnesota. And Minnesota has passed legislation that requires all state employees to undergo training on tribal sovereignty. And then they also have a requirement for all state agencies to have consultation with tribes on issues that impact them. They actually have an entire office under the governor for tribal state relations, and they offer training to state employees and agencies. And that really just helps build a baseline of understanding and respect before engagement and partnership is happening. And then each state agency in Minnesota also is responsible for having one, sometimes multiple tribal liaisons. And those folks are working directly with the 11 federally recognized Native nations who share their geography with the state. Excuse me. But they're also working with the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council, or MIAC. So the impact of this work has been really incredible and just really cool to see, and a model that I hope other states and regions can really follow. But it's resulted in stronger consultation processes, different policy, a whole lot of visibility and awareness for Native nations and individuals across the state. And then it's also resulted in some really cool things around land back, visibility in urban spaces, and so much more. And then we also have some cool examples really coming from urban housing collaboratives. So in cities like Seattle, Portland, Minneapolis, and more, we have these native-led housing authorities who are partnering with local governments to really address the need for housing insecurity among our populations. And this is great because often, in addition to meeting that housing need, they're also providing culturally grounded services, wraparound support, and just kind of making it, again, a sustainable process for folks. And then we also have really cool intergovernmental agreements happening. And I think one that's top of mind for me, just with all of the different climate things happening and natural disasters, is that oftentimes tribal nations and local counties or city governments are collaborating around firefighting, EMS, and disaster preparedness. And there's a really cool example from the Hoopa Valley tribe out in California who partnered with state and county agencies during wildfire response. And so just really helping out when they see that need, but having it be reciprocal and having a good policy and procedure for that. And so, really, just some key takeaways. These respectful partnerships are working because they recognize that tribal nations are these sovereign governance, not just community stakeholder groups. And then it's also happening because power is being shared, sovereignty is being protected, and Native voices are being centered throughout the process. And it's important to keep in mind that there's no one way to build a successful partnership, as I'm sure we're going to hear through the conversation today, but really just try to follow the lead of that Native nation or community that you're hoping to work with. And now I think I've taken enough time just kind of in the beginning here, but I want to just give a brief welcome to today's speakers. We have some really incredible women leaders joining us today that I am really excited to hear from, and I know you are all are too. Melanie Benjamin will be moderating today's conversation with Cerna, excuse me, Ashley Hemmers, and Amira Madison serving as panelists. But I will go ahead and turn it away to Melanie. Thank you so much.
Bonjour, Anin Anishinaabe du Mino Gizigad Nungom, Mandamin Indigenous Cause, Melanie Benjamin Indigo. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. And I want to start out by saying miigwech to all the panelists that were briefly introduced, and also to the Native Governance Center for inviting me to be a part of this discussion this morning. And I'm Melanie Benjamin, and I am an enrolled member of the Mille Lacs Expandable Ojibwe in East Central Minnesota. We have 11 tribes in the state of Minnesota, 7 Ojibwe and 4 Dakota. So I served as the tribal chair for the Mille Lacs Band from 2000 to 2024. And my last term, I decided that it was time to like branch out a little bit and do some other things. So I'm currently working with a company that we do strategic planning, and we work with tribal governments throughout the nation. So I still get to be involved. And so, how I'd like to start today is to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about who they are and what is your personal experience and government partnerships involving Native nations and communities. And I wanted to mention too is that Cree Rose talked a little bit about the state of Minnesota. We have an excellent, in my opinion, and because of my tenure as tribal chair, I've had the opportunity to work with many, many governors. And I can tell you from my experience that Governor Tim Walz and Lieutenant Peggy Flanagan, who is from the White Earth Nation, are great partners with tribal governments in the state of Minnesota. And we've had many, many, and you just listen to some of the legislative intent that was passed to make sure that the state of Minnesota works and respects and is educated. And so, of course, there would be respect from that education about the 11 tribes in the state of Minnesota. So, with that, I'm very proud of our governor and lieutenant governor. And so, I'd like to start with Amira. And if you can introduce yourself and then tell us about some of your personal experience with government partnerships.
Kataptush, Melanie, thank you so much, and to Native Governance Center for having me today. Wanikisak natasui sa Mira Madison, nutoma sa akwana hanat, nutai bastinat. Good day. My name is Amira Madison. I am an enrolled citizen of the Wampanoag tribe of Gehirakwana, which is a tribe located on a really small island off the coast of Massachusetts. And I'm really grateful. To be here, and I currently live in and reside in Boston. And I in my in my career wise, sorry, my brain. Career wise, I am the first Tribal Nation Strategic Initiatives Manager for Harvard University's Native American program. And I'm also a councilwoman with the Wampanoag Tribe of Yehitikuna. So I'm wearing a bunch of different hats. I would say my partnerships that I have a bit of experience in, specifically is with the city of Boston. Prior to working for Harvard and HUNAP, I was the first supporting Indigenous communities program manager with the Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics, as well as the Equity and Inclusion Cabinet. And that is, that was something I I saw the opportunity and thought it looked like an incredible one, something that I was interested in, and I jumped right in. It was quite an experience, and I look forward to talking on that today. And that's a bit about me.
That's the thing about that mute button. If you don't have that arrow exactly on it, it takes a minute or so. Thank you very much for that. That's pretty exciting. And so our next panelist is Ashley.
Hi, Kamadhu. My name is Ashley Hemmers. I'm from the Fort Mojave Indian Tribe. We are right in the heart of the Mojave Desert. So yesterday it was about 117 degrees, a nice summer day on my homelands. I have the honor and privilege of being the tribal administrator for our nation. I work directly with our elected officials and help to curate the private and public arm of our government so that we can make sure that our membership and our community continue to thrive into, into the present day and, into the future. And so in terms of private partnerships or public partnerships. Fort Mojave, we are a small tribe, but we are in the tri-state area of California, Arizona, and Nevada. And if anybody knows anything about, state regulations, California and Nevada are kind of those wonky states that have different ideas and views of sovereignty, and Arizona is on a different plane. So at any given day, in terms of our reservation, for jurisdictional purposes, there are usually 19 agencies at the table for my jurisdictions from 3 states, including federal government officials. And then that's not even including when we talk about kind of cultural protection and stewardship. And so for me, public-private partnerships are really important because uh, it's integral in making sure that folks remember the promises that they made when they leased some land from us, right? And so I'm often a reminder that rent's due, and we need to make sure that we're holding up our end of the bargain to the contracts that they or the offices that they represent agreed to, even if it wasn't them. And that's one thing that's really key and integral to my work is reminding folks in the United States, specifically government and local officials, that uh, their government is a system, an institution. And sometimes because of, the way that um, there's a political sphere in governing and governing spaces, folks forget that these institutions have responsibilities aside from just who the people are in those positions. For Indigenous communities, we understand that our service is to our people, is to our land, is to our culture. And sometimes, that is a hard bridge for folks who have a different idea of leadership, of how to interact with communities like mine. So it takes a lot of nod off to the state of Minnesota for helping with that education in the state. That is huge and exciting, and a framework that, a lot of other states should consider, because governments are systems. It's not about the person who is responsible for helping the people. It's really about providing the help to the people. So that's a little bit about me and what I do. I'm excited to talk this morning, and good to meet you all.
Good. Thank you very much. So, Angelina, tell us a little bit about who you are and your personal experience with government partnerships involving Native nations and communities.
Miigwech for having me here, Native Governance Center, and to meeting all of you wonderful ladies as well. Ani Bojo, ni gach Baneshi Bidwitan Dijnakas, Mekinak Waja Nenwag Minoa Onayotea Kandunjba, Shikandodem, Ojiboinata Kwendao. Hello, everyone. My given name translates to gentle calling bird. My English name is Angelina Serna. I'm Turtle Clan. I come from the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians and the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin. I'm really glad to be here with you all. I currently serve as the co-president of the NCI Youth Commission, as well as I work for Giza Consulting Services as the youth specialist. A lot of the work that I kind of do is rooted in Native youth and making sure they're involved in decisions that are impacting us and making sure they have that voice. And whether that's at the national level through NCI or really on the grounds work through smaller communities, through Giza Consulting, I've seen firsthand how powerful partnerships can be, especially with tribal nations and governments as well. And, building respect and trust with one another has been a really big thing with me, especially with youth and national governments. And I feel too often a lot of Native communities are kind of an afterthought. And so, kind of pushing that narrative that, we've been here and, Native youth do have that voice, especially when making these decisions. And so kind of want to be here and learn more and, change that narrative and make sure youth are part of these conversations more often. And so, I am kind of newer to all this leadership spaces. I've only been in these positions for about 8 months now. And so we're really trying to get out there, really trying to learn, and I'm really excited to learn from you ladies as well. And yeah, just really excited to be here today. Miigwech.
Yeah, miigwech. And I'm going to start with you again, Angelina. Are there elements of successful partnerships you want to uplift, or a short story you can share about a memorable partnership? And I'm going to just kind of jump in on that as the tribal chair of the Mille Lacs Band for over 20 years. Of course, I've worked with national government, federal government, state, county organizations throughout the country. And one of the partnerships that I wanted to focus on that really had an impact on grassroots membership for the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe, and that is that we had a partnership with the Initiative Foundation. And what we did was a 12-week training for our members to look at maybe cottage businesses or other businesses selling powwow materials and just all of their art in that area. And it was very successful. And I did the training as well, so I could understand and promote that. So that's one example of a really positive partnership. And so I'd like to give you the opportunity as well to talk about your partnerships as well. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. I feel for me, one that really has stood out has been with NCI, so the National Congress of American Indians. Through being on the youth commission, we've been able to build stronger relationships between youth and leadership at NCI, but also youth and tribal leaders and federal agencies. We've gotten to have one-on-one meetings with federal leaders, with federal agencies, and sometimes these meetings will come up very quickly. And so at mid-year, we gotten a lot of opportunities to speak with these leaders, and it really allowed youth to have meaningful partnerships. And we weren't just asked to sit in a room or sit at this table. We were generally asked what we think, what do we want, what do we need? And I think those are important questions when it comes to youth, because a lot of times our youth are really we're overskipped. We aren't really asked what do we need. And I think that's really important because, we're always asking other people, what do they need? We're asking tribal leaders, what does your community need? But sometimes everybody's needs are different. And so, our feedback is really included into how policies are being shaped, how resolutions are being shaped, and really showing youth that our advocacy efforts are important and are needed to really advance Indian country. And I think one powerful example would be when youth voices were included at the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. Through NSA, I was able to attend that event, and that was kind of like a lifelong dream for me. I always wanted to go to the UN, always wanted to do policy on an international level, and I got to do that and see firsthand how Indigenous people from all across the globe can team up and partner with each other to, bring our issues to the table to really address these issues in front of global leaders, right? And so we're bringing ideas, we're bringing energy, we're bringing truth, we're bringing, our teachings with us everywhere we can. And so, again, I'm still new, so I'm still learning more about partnerships, but I would say for now, I think those and being with NCI has, really shown me that partnerships is more than just, small in your community. It goes way beyond that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Amira.
I think I would piggyback off of that. Of what Angelina has just stated. I think I couldn't agree more with that. But I also, I think I would, I would say that yes, partnerships are so foundational and not just internally in your community, but also externally. And I think that for me and the work that I've done, maybe in the time that I was with the city or right now, we're kind of in this like I feel like we've been people have been building partnerships maybe, and they've felt a little siloed. And so I think what I see now is this recognition collectively of people seeing that, why are we not coming together to do this? And so I'm starting to see more partnership together, and not just, within our own community, but within different communities, and also with local government, as well as federal, like state government too. I think it's slow and steady, especially being here in the state of Massachusetts, where colonization is very much embedded in every piece of in everything in our state. And we've had quite the battle, but we also have quite the battle ahead. And I would say that we have more of a growing, I think, we have growing, I think, number of partners that are coming along to do this work as well, and who are interested in actually partnering with us. I recently had the opportunity to sit in on a conversation with the Department of Environment. And, on top of the couple of hats I wear, I started in a nonprofit land back organization with my cousin and other women in my community to purchase a piece of land that was very, very important to not just my family, but our community, because it sits on our clay cliffs, which are one of two clay cliffs in the world. And, we applied for the municipal vulnerability grant so that we could purchase the land back. However, there were some things within that. I think being a nonprofit land back organization, it can be complicated when seeking funds. And so we're hoping to use those funds in partnership with our tribe to, begin the stages of getting that land back and purchasing it. However, I should say too that Native Land Conservancy, which is also an all Native led organization for land back in Massachusetts, purchased the land for us and created an MOA for us to be able to buy back the land from them. So the grant that we received from the state, they have been incredible partners. They're super flexible, they're interested in actually helping, and they're also interested in listening. And so I think in our state, and I know that in many other states and cities and communities, it is complicated when we talk about, who has access to funding for Native people, right? We're often categorized in these groups of being a racial category rather than being a political identity. And what does that mean to, a person who's been living in Massachusetts historically, who has no clue that there are two federally recognized tribes in their state, who have not, who have original agreements with England, right? So it's so there's so many different pieces to that, I think. And it is there's such a level of education that is needed in that. So, we're really lucky to have partners who are willing to learn and listen, but also consider how to change the policy. One thing that occurred was in, in applying for that funding, we had to do it with our tribe. And so our tribe had to apply. And if you have a tribal government that maybe, sits on a certain side of conservative or doesn't necessarily want to be working with their people in certain ways, it's complicated, right? And so, you know, um, the reason that we went after that funding was because we felt like there wasn't something being done in the first place, and we wanted to protect that property. And we had to the tribe would have to waive sovereign immunity, which is something that comes up so often for tribal nations. And I understand fully why we should not have to waive our sovereign immunity when signing any document. And I have to respect tribal sovereignty in that way. But at the same time, we're losing property on Martha's Vineyard, which is a very heavily tourist centered place. And we are fighting off billionaires who want to turn our properties into these escape, these resorts, for people, for the wealthy and elite to come to. And so it's such a crazy thing, but I think we were really lucky to have the state of Massachusetts say, hey, or we'll work with you within this, we can change this, but maybe we can't change that. And we figured it out, and hopefully we can get that MOA with the state settled, and the agreement between the tribe as well as the Aquinnah Land Initiative settled, and hopefully move forward with receiving the funds of that grant and being able to implement some of the things we want to do. But partnerships are so complicated with multiple different peoples from different backgrounds and who have different pieces of knowledge and things like that. But it's taken a lot of patience um, and understanding and listening and putting forward the educational piece of things for people to really understand. And I know that that's a hard road for all of us, and we're constantly having to do that, and it is exhausting. But it's also a really beautiful thing when you see that it can impact multiple different communities and organizations.
Good, thank you. Ashley.
Yeah, I think that some of the things that have been touched on are, extremely important. Building the trust, educating folks in your environment, external and internal, to help partnerships get some momentum and get to a place of action. One of the things that we like to focus on here at Fort Mojave is just a two-prong approach of really being intentional about how we're educating, because I don't know about y'all, but my tribe is really small. And so that means we only have like a handful of people trying to burn all of the hours in the day, making sure that people understand that these spaces are sacred, that people were here, that there's a difference between tribal government, how to interact and engage with tribal government. And so it can become very overwhelming for not only tribal officials, but also for community members who are often volunteering to develop these partnerships, seeking out additional funds from nonprofits or other partners that may be able to help, garner some resources. And then it could also be a little bit overwhelming for people on the other side who want to be respectful, who have never engaged with a tribal government or a tribal nonprofit, don't understand what those models look like, and then, find someone, think they're working with something, offend somebody, it just goes into a circle. So what we like to do here, because strategy is so big, we're very intentional about having targeted approaches to our partnerships and being really specific. And in my capacity, if I know that my team is really working through a resource shift or transition, or identifying capabilities so that we can go after a large project, and I know that they have limitations, then I'm assuming that other tribes in our area are facing similar limitations, some on the better end of the scale, some on the worse end of the scale, and then also localities, right? Because I'm in a rural area. So a lot of in terms of the temperament for the last 10 years, rural America has really been hit hard in terms of the lack of resources and their limitations. They've also been faced a lot with a brain drain. People go to cities for jobs, they don't come back to hometowns. So what we find is people are just trying to do their best with what they have. And so instead of identifying, how are we going to build this institutional knowledge so that overall we have a holistic engagement system where our governments work together, I'm like, Ashley don't have the time for that. I'm trying to retire, y'all. Like, I do not have time to be playing with people. And so what we do through this targeted approach is we're really specific about our ask. And I think that that's okay for Indian country. For far too long, we haven't been I don't know, given like a permission slip to ask for what we want, but we really need to be direct. And if people aren't okay with it, then we have to be okay with that, even though, it could get under our skin if we have officials who have responsibilities to understand that they have additional responsibilities to the system of governing government to government relationships, right? So we have to realize that sometimes our activation is due to an emotional response, that we may be frustrated that the people who are responsible for taking care of that government to government relationship are not maybe equipped to handle that situation, right? And so for me, in the early part of my career, that was the thing that would really, hit the wall for me. 3 states, working with different counties, working with the feds at different levels. Each in 3 states, each federal official is different as well. Like, so if I'm working with the FBI, it's a different one in Nevada, different one in Arizona, different one in California, different way that they work, right? And so I learned very fast that I can't be out here teaching everybody how they should be interacting with me and my community. I really need to be direct about what my community needs and really need to be intentional about whether or not those folks can help with that. And I've helped to build capacity with my team, especially with our nonprofit or other partners who seek relationship building with us, that we need to be equipped and ready to come to the table with our ass, understand what our needs are, so that when we meet someone, we can identify whether or not this will be a good partnership and they're able to meet our needs and they're on board with it, right? It kind of, like, now that I say it out loud, kind of sounds like dating, right? You have to be like your whole self if you want to meet a whole partner. And I feel like, we've just been in this toxic environment for so long that now we just need healthy relationships. And so that's kind of a daily interaction, or, a daily thing that I go through with me and my team.
Thank you for that. And I just want to note that you 3 individuals, when you look at how you want to establish those partners, you really do your research and you do your work. And I think that and love what you're doing, even though you get frustrated at sometimes. And I think about Mille Lacs Band as well. As we're located in 4 counties. We have um, offices down in the Minneapolis, St. Paul area. So we too work with a lot of different local governments, and we have one government, Pine County, that is excellent, and they want to work with us no matter what, anything. We had even some of our members coming out of the correction facilities. And so they sponsored a position, but they gave it to us to make sure that we picked the right person and to work together with that. And then we have one county that sometimes we hear nothing from them. And then we have a third county where the headquarters of the Mille Lacs Band is, and they are so tough to work with. And we had a treaty rights case that went to the Supreme Court, and it was in our favor, and they hated that. And then we had economic development that was very successful. They did not like that. Then we had the Tribal Law and Order Act that we went through, that they weren't happy with that. And it was interesting. One of the citizens talked about that they all lived in this region, and a lot of people were very poor. But on the social scale, there was always someone poorer than them, and that was the reservation community members. And then when we had the capacity to start to branch out, do business in economic development, that meant we raised higher on the social scale, so somebody had to move down. And still today, we deal with that in one of the counties where they will challenge just about anything that our government wants to do, and it's the constant education. And but I would be very honored to have any 3 of you on my team to go and talk to some of these government officials, because you represent yourself and your community so well. So thank you very much. So our third question, and that's extension of our governments, Native Nations governments, and we've had those from the beginning of time, before there was even a U.S. government. And so give us some examples of some traditional government roles that you want to share and why you feel those are important about the leadership in the government today. And again, talking a little bit about Mille Lacs Band, in 1934, the Reorganization Act came to be. And so all the feds showed up on the different reservations and gave us these forms of government. Some of these were like the VFW governance. And so that's why we operated that. We had a lot of outside people sitting on our decision-making boards to tell us exactly what we need to do and how we need to do it. And back in the 80s, our chairman, Art Gobble was his name, he said, no, this is not working for us. We're the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe. and this is our land, and this is what we want to present and have our people operate from this. So they thought, what would be the best type of reorganization of our governance structure that the U.S. gave us, but also incorporate who we are as people. So we have a ceremony called Big Drum. And so the Big Drum ceremony, there are many individuals that hold responsibilities and for that ceremony and for the community. And so they said, this is who we are. And that's what we need to have our governance reflect. But they said, we know the Bureau of Indian Affairs and these federal agents are not going to accept that if we use a ceremonial kind of responsibility of who we are as people to structure our government. So we use the federal government, which the federal government also used an Indian government to structure their separation of powers. But what we did is we call it the division of powers, and we use that structure, executive, legislative, and judicial. But we incorporated the big drum ceremonies. There are people that all carry a responsibility. And so the chairman at the time, Art Gabo, he said, I'm dividing up all this power. Normally they gave it all to the tribal chairman. He says, I'm willing to give this to the legislative branch and this to the judicial branch. And we've been operating under that structure since the 80s, and it's been very successful for us and also helped us to be successful in economic development. So what is your example and when you think about that, and what you can share about those types of cultural influences and how we governance? And I will start with you, Ashley.
Okay, yeah, I think that it's really important when uh I I made the choice to work for my tribal government, and I consider it an honor that I have the ability to, right? Now it's not all rainbows and glitter. Like some days I'm like, I love my people, right? But on, one of the things that really worked out well for us is recently we had a huge national monument push for Avikwame National Monument, which was protected under the Biden administration, but had been going on for over 40 years. And so one of the things that was interesting for us was that sometimes as tribal government specifically, and I've been in this for over 2 decades, is how we interact as tribal to tribal government, right? When we think about government to government relations, sometimes we forget, oh yeah, we've been here since time immemorial, but we forget we did diplomacy between tribes, right? And what that looked like. And so for Avikwame National Monument, Avikwame is a sacred place for Mojave people. We believe we're created from there. Our oral tradition tells us that that's where it is. And being close to it is ceremonious for us every day, because it allows us to live in that space that our traditions tell us helps us live in a good way, the more proximity to that geographical location. And that's something that a lot of non-native folks, quite frankly, don't understand, right? That a place could have a presence, could have an energy, a being. And so for us, while we did have external partnerships with non-tribal NGOs and other governments and other locales, we also had to cultivate partnerships with other tribes and remind and remember to be good relatives in that space too. And I think that sometimes, especially in the digital landscape that we live in, a lot of our ceremonies can be performative. I know for me, when I started a whole like Instagram because I was so offended, I was like, this is not, I need something more authentic, right? So I'm just gonna rant on the internet. But my point is that being a good relative and being respectful of one another is ceremony in and of itself. And
Mm.
so when we as Fort Mojave decided and committed via consensus that we were going to protect our most sacred space, then that required our leadership and our team to act in our most sacred ways. And that meant that we needed to have more patience for our relatives up and down the river and really talk in a good way and build those relationships about where we were coming from, being transparent and building trust and making sure that they had access. Because like I said, some tribes, depending on geography, are going through a harder time than others, right? And so for us, Avikwame has 22 tribal nations that are associated with the sanctity of that space. And our songs, our bird songs, are shared throughout the high desert Southwest that talk about our creation stories. And so we looked at our older maps and we reached out to our older relatives and we talked to them about what we were willing, the resources we were willing to put on the table. We shared capacity, right? We built toolkits, resolutions, identified how they can speak with their people, why this would be important, how they could engage. If they couldn't come to meetings, we asked our partners, how can you help us get our relatives to meetings? Like, we're okay, we got it, but how can you help them get to DC? How can you do this? And opening up that shared space, I think, really led to our ability to protect a large portion of the desert right in the heart of the Mojave so swiftly and quickly that people didn't even know what it was. When we're speaking to the higher end of the administrations, they were like, how is this, like, I keep hearing about this Avikwame stuff. And I think because we intentionally were acting in that ceremonial space with each other, I believe in creator works in ways, right? So if you put good energy out, then that good energy will help bring that together. And so when I think about ceremony, I often think about um, what are our most simplest forms of ceremony. It's waking up in a good way, saying a prayer, understanding that the land is there for us to steward, and also making sure that the people who rely on it are okay and are able to protect it as they have been since time immemorial. And that's how we led that partnership, and we were able to see that passing of that national monument in 9 months. And I really attribute it to the ability for all of our leaders coming together. One really cool thing that happened that we kind of had to keep under wraps a little bit during the time was Secretary Holland was able to do a sunrise ceremony with us. But we were at the opening of the National Monument, and all river tribes from the lower Colorado River, from the northern Grand Canyon Rim to the southern border into the Delta, because the river flows, right? People forget that the river flows from here to the ocean, and oceans don't separate us, they connect us, right? That's how we're able to connect to our global indigenous brothers and sisters. And so we were able to have all of the river tribes on our land in a protective space in our most um a sacred area, the leadership from every tribe there. And it was really inspiring to see how many Native women were in elected leadership authority. And so we had brought, a blanket for Secretary Holland, but we in community had all of the elected Native leaders, women leaders, provide that around her. And I didn't know how profound that moment was until after. But I think when we walk in those good ways, then we're able to just be who we are and protect the spaces we can. And that's the power of partnerships. That's the power of community. And I think that it's really important.
Thank you so much. Angelina.
Yeah, I really loved your answer, Ashley. I think that spoke to a lot of things that I wanted to speak about as well. But I feel like for me as a Anishinaabe and Oneida, like there was a time where both my tribes were kind of at each other, but also with each other at the same time. So when you think of the wampum boat, that's them having that relationship with each other. Um, but I feel like with both of those tribes and knowing where I come from, but also, still being involved and still learning our traditional governments and our systems I feel like are deeply rooted in community care. Um, our leadership wasn't just about having these titles, having this big name, having a bonnet. It was about the responsibility to our people, to our land, to our waters, and to our future generations. And, when you think about it, this work is very selfless work, and you have to think about other people, and you kind of come last. And sometimes it's a little bit of the downfall, but I've learned that, there's a big reward, and it's seeing other youth smile, knowing that they have a voice, or having leadership say, hey, I got to work with this youth, and, they're doing X, Y, and Z. And, I really think back to, our roles like our clan mothers, our knowledge keepers, our youth. And, these were all central in what we did as Anishinaabe and also Haudenosaunee people as well. And something I'm really learning more about and really trying to include in my leadership is my 13 grandmother teachings and my 7 grandfather teachings as well. And, back in the day, Anishinaabe was, spoken, and, there was no English. There was, nothing else that we knew. It was Anishinaabe or it was Oneida, right? And, back in the day, there was no translator. And communities understood each other through traditional languages. And, that's something that I hope hold really deeply to myself is learning my language, learning my culture, learning my ceremonies. And, we always say, we need to be involved in all these things. And as a youth, I want to stay dedicated to that because I think that's where our heart and soul is. Truly, everything is connected to our creator, through our land. And, there's so much we can give thanks to. And so I think being involved in our traditional ways is always, really important to me, and, staying connected. I want to see more tribal leaders involved in their ceremonies or involved in their communities or involved in, a language program, right? It's always so important to see that. But I think even today, I think leadership means listening, right? Rather than speaking and being the first one to be up there on a podium, right? It means checking in with your community, holding them accountable, holding yourself accountable, even when it's hard. Sometimes we may not make the right decisions. Sometimes we, second guess ourselves and say, hey, was that the right decision? But, it's holding yourself accountable, right? This work is very selfless work, and, it is very hard, but staying grounded in our teachings and our values, I think, is super important and something that a lot of our communities really need in this moment, especially in this political climate, is staying grounded into who we are and where we come from. And, saying our prayers, smudging, going out to the land, going out to the water, picking our berries, whatever that may be for, all of our communities. And again, we're all very different. We all have different, traditional roles, governance roles, teachings, languages, right? But it's staying grounded in who you are and
Good. Thank you. Amira.
Thank you. Wow, just listening to both of your answers was just so resonated so much with me, and I'm just so grateful for being validated. I feel validated very much. I think for me, something that I thought a lot about in the past few years is the role of women in our communities and the power of women and the resiliency that exists within our DNA and our women. I'm really grateful to come from, strong women behind me, my mom, my grandmother, my great grandmother. And I'm so grateful to have met so many incredible women in the work that I've done, or, just thinking about my time, learning and leadership with Unity. Um, I just, I think about how colonization has really impacted so much of how we see women, how we talk about women in our history, how we uphold women, how we do anything that has to do with women. And I think for something that's been very important that I've kind of seen a shift in is the recognition of the power of our women. And for us in our community, our women were also leaders. Were the the Sonkash, or the chief of our communities. And the reason that we are here and that we were able to survive is because of the alliances and the agreements that those women were able to create in the 1600s while our people were, dealing with major loss of community, just villages wiped out, and people dying left and right. And I think about that every day. And I think about how those stories were not told. I remember growing up, I went to what was called Turtle Camp or Turtle Project with my tribe in the summer. And, nobody talked about the women who led. Nobody talked about Awashonks or Weedamoo. And that breaks my heart because, here I am in leadership myself, and I see a lot of women who are in leadership in my community, or women who are taking the brunt of the work in our community, who are pushing forward with land initiatives, the arts and culture, and making sure that we're passing it on to our young people, and I've seen the shift though that's happening in and educating on those things, but it took time for us to really hear about that. And one of our first chair people of our tribe was a woman, and she also was the longest living woman in our community. And we're really, we have grown so much since then, and we're so grateful for that. So I think, one of the things I really want in any partnership for anybody to know or to carry into this world is, the role of women and the power that they hold. And it is not to compete with anybody else or any other being on the planet. It is just to respect, I think, the roles and responsibilities that we all naturally hold in our community and in the world. And I think, our society, that, American society or Western society, does not give a damn about that, right? It's more political government, like capitalism. These are the things that we, put roles and responsibilities into. But thinking about community and family and land, all of these things that are so important, they exist because we understand the roles and responsibilities that all those things play in our lives. And so I think, the more that we can educate, the more that we can push forward with that understanding. I hope that people can get to that. I see that just shifting as a young person. I remember, the shifting of minds and how unity educated me in that way to open my mind to it, to also go back to my community and be that person that also said those things. So, we're watching as different things unfold generationally, and that's just a really beautiful thing. And you know, I think we are one of the reasons that I think humankind is going to survive and continue on in the way that it does, or any being is going to survive, is because collectively we understand that mutual respect between all beings is a necessity and is required for survival for all of us. So yeah, I think a lot about that in these days.
Thank you very much. And that was some very powerful, uh, impactful statements that you each presented. And so I want to remind the participants you have the opportunity to ask questions if you like, and you can put those questions in the chat and we can get through those. And one of the things that caught my attention is that we're talking about governance structures and how we operate. And I haven't heard anything about statutes like the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe. We have a whole book of, our laws put in our statutes and different titles, and we have government uh, resolutions and things of that sort. But this conversation is really focused on the natural law of who we are as Anishinaabe. And so I'm very impressed with that. So here's a question for us, a call to action for all. And I am going to ask Angelina to be the first to respond. And civil engagement is critical for citizens of Native nations, especially our young people. And Angelina's talked that she's new into this space, but wow, she has did her work, and I'm sure she has listened over the years to her community and her family to put her at this knowledge level. And so when we think about young people and their vision and what they want to see and how they want governments to respond to the issues, that a lot of these is also the same in non-Indian, non-native communities. And so how do we, from that youth perspective, starting with this question, how can we create new awareness and foster spaces for our citizens, our friends, or non-native community members to get involved?
Well, thanks for that question. I think that kind of speaks to what I was saying earlier, is asking, what do the youth need? And so thank you for that question. I think for Native youth, I think it starts with being seen and taken seriously. I think too often we as youth are invited to these spaces to check off a box or to say, hey, we had youth in the room, but nobody was really engaging with those youth. And so having real engagement means having decision-making powers as well. And so, that can mean creating youth councils, having mentors with tribal leaders and youth, having spaces where our knowledge is honored. And I think a lot of the work I've been doing is recognizing that our elders have a different perspective on things, and so do our young ones as well. And I think it's so important to have both of them in the room at the same time because everybody has a different perspective. But I think when we have young ones in the room with our elders or our older ones and our tribal leaders, youth can bring a newer perspective and we can kind of collaborate, with what do you think? What do I think? And create something meaningful. And I think there's also a need for, grounded civic engagement, civic education, stuff that really teaches our young people about governance, about our histories, about our rights. And that's one thing we're really trying to do at the for our youth commission at NCI is really advance policy understanding. I feel like working in this policy space for 5 years now, there are a lot of things that I did not know. There are a lot of things that were left out for me, and noticed that that was also common in other Native youth. And so, really educating Native youth to understand, what is public policy? What does our governance exist? Why does it exist? Why do we have to follow these rules? How do our communities, how do they work? And it's really explaining that to youth so then they can make their own voices recognized and they can have a vote and truly understand, what's being said here. How can we, expand on this? And I think, I've focused a lot in more of our Native communities, but I've also worked with non-Native communities. And so I think for non-Native folks, it's, showing up, and doing the work first, right? It's doing your research, seeing, what do youth need? Where are these youth located? Where are they lacking? Do they have this? Do they have that? I think listening, being consistent is also something that is needed from us, especially when it comes to Native-led efforts and initiatives. And, really listen to the youth that are speaking, right? You can have your own opinion on things, right? But I think listening to seeing where people come from is really big, especially for me. It's hearing what other people have to say first, and then, saying, well, this is how I feel, but working through that, right? And, I think civic engagement isn't really about, saving, it's about solidarity. And so really coming together to understand, where our youth are coming from, because not every youth has the same experience. Some have gone through very traumatic things. Some didn't have those teachings growing up. Some didn't have language. They didn't have land, right? So not every youth is the same, and they're going to have, different ways of going about things. So I think for natives, non-natives, it's, sitting in the room, listening. And if you're going to invite youth into the space, sit with them, actually listen, but don't do it to check off a box.
Good, thank you. Ashley.
Yeah, I think I'm really excited that Angelina was able to answer that because I think it's really important for having that youth perspective for us. One of the things that we like to remember here at Fort Mojave is that in our tribal in our cultural ways, youth were part of the table, right? Like they were helping. And in Fort Mojave clan system, when we identify our relatives from grandma to mom to dad to uncle, we have a certain way of saying those in our language. But our youth, our fourth generation, become the big and little sisters of our elders. And I really think that that's beautiful thing and part of my language, because it helps to identify who's responsible for how. And so for civic engagement, we do a couple of things, right? We like to get it early with the youth on our end, and not just about kind of national engagement, but if you're working in my summer program, getting summer food, getting whatever, then you're going to be exposed to our tribal law and order code. You're going to be exposed to knowing who your tribal council members are, why we have tribal council members, what they do. And so you're not kind of fresh off the landscape thinking like, I don't know what this looks like. And I think that that's really been helpful for our community here at Fort Mojave. Also, Fort Mojave is a water rights tribe to the Colorado River, which has been in drought. And so um, one of the biggest challenges that we're facing is this idea of erasure, especially when states and the federal government are fighting over water, right? And so we have to make sure that when we're thinking about educating forward, we have to educate internally so that they know who those leaders were that went to the Supreme Court and got those decisions, and how that impacts and how we protect them today, because we're getting ready to prepare those leaders, because it might be them that have to go before Congress. And I don't know if you've been watching these hearings, but you're gonna talk to my babies like that, you're gonna get antsy, right? So we have to prepare folks in that way. And also when it comes to civic engagement, we do a healthy dose of reminding, like natives weren't often able to participate. Like we remind them of the 1924 Citizenship Act. We introduce them to elders who have been impacted from boarding school, so that they understand that these policy decisions could impact us in real ways. And then if we're going through something locally, we make sure to have youth leaders at the forefront, and we help them be prepared to talk in these local commission meetings, to go to the planning and zoning meetings, to talk to their assembly members. And so I think civic engagement has to be, engaged often. And the people who don't utilize that are really the folks that aren't going to be successful in developing trust with community that help to develop partnerships with others.
Thank you. Mira.
I think that, yeah, I 100% agree on including youth in the conversation, and also them being at the forefront, because I think, where they're going to be bringing the solutions to the issues that we have now that are continuing in, right, to the future. I often feel like more opportunity for engagement needs to occur, and in terms of mentorship and my brain is blanking on the word I'm looking for, but I think it's really important to provide an opportunity and a paid opportunity for young people to be able to see how something works. If I hadn't, I honestly, like, as much as, working for a city government is a lot, I am so grateful for the opportunity to have worked there, because I wouldn't have understood all the moving parts that make this machine. And it is really helpful to understand what are your rights, what are you know what are the rights of the community, what opportunities exist for community. So many people have no clue about the multiple different pieces that run a government. And I think it's really important for people to know. And the power, it empowers you as a person to get further involved. And I think I also think that it helped me as a tribal leader understand, some of the things that were happening in the same real time. The city of Boston was receiving COVID funds, and so did our tribes. And I was like, oh yeah, they're creating small grants for opportunity for people in the city. So we should do the same. Like, it would be very interesting to provide opportunity to small businesses, to artists, to, to provide some autonomy to them to do something in the community, right? And you can create like policy that can, or you can create an application that has rules and guidelines, but also you could make it as flexible as you wanted. And, that was such a hard battle to have because people of a certain, I feel like some of our members who have been doing this for a long time couldn't see that and couldn't understand it. And it is hard when you're working with folks who have been in this work for a long time because I think it is hard and it becomes a space of you've been emotionally abused in a way, right? Like you've literally had to endure, constant microaggressions, racism, and all these different things in your role, but also fighting your town, fighting your local town, fighting your government, fighting the state. Like it's just it is such an exhausting like experience. And so I think I fully understood like the many different things at play. And so I was so grateful for the opportunity to serve in the city, to understand what it meant to be a civil servant, and how important it is for people to have that opportunity, to have a paid opportunity and have it be like equitable of an opportunity. You can't just like bring people into space and not provide an equitable space as well. So it needs to, I think there's a lot of work that needs to happen within any workspace. I think we're very Western HR centered, and I think we need to get to a place of being able to support and help people who are coming from different backgrounds and communities. And we have to shift that through human resources and how we treat our people and how we advocate for them and how we support them. So there's so many pieces, but I really feel like just providing the opportunity is a huge, huge thing to serve your people. And I've had the opportunity to do that for my own tribe. I've worked in many different departments as a 20-year-old. I think that's what's also helped me understand the different things that create a foundational government, but also administration, and also in the differences between that. What is the role of the government? What is the role of the administration? What is the role of a young person and an elder? What is, there's so many roles and responsibilities that you learn when taking the opportunity to work for your people. And so I'm really grateful for that. And it's just something I would recommend to anybody.
Thank you very much. And this conversation has made my heart so happy. I feel so good. And when I think about our future in Indian country, here are some prime examples that our future will be bright, even though we will have challenges along the way, but we're preparing our next generations to be a part of our success as Indian nations. And I know there are a question from the audience. And so with that, Cree Rose, could you assist us with that question?
Absolutely. Apologies, had to get unmuted there. But our question so far is, what advice would you give to new government staff or maybe just to a new leader who wants to build up that trust with tribal nations? And we'll just let anybody jump in.
All right, Amira, I know you have a perfect answer, so I'm going to give it to you to start the conversation here.
I think to build trust with a tribal nation, I think you need to um, I think you have to have humility and you have to understand that you don't know everything. And when you go into that space, you have to respect that these are peoples who have been on these lands for thousands of years and that they know that place better than you. And I think that takes a lot, I think, of you to recognize that. And it is a really hard thing to do. And I understand that. I understand that, ego and all these different things are involved every day with us as people. But you have to humble yourself when you're coming to a tribal community and respect their way of life and do not tell them about, what is happening, I can't tell you how insulting it is for an agency to come to tribal council and tell me about how important it is to have wind farms being built off of my tribal lands. And yet my people have been stewarding those lands and those waters for thousands of years. And so it's so very important to understand the history and understand that, again, you do not know better. And I think that's a really hard thing to do. So respecting their ways, respecting and asking them what they want to see in whatever it is that you're asking for or looking for, and also providing that, if you're interviewing a Native person, give them that interview. Also provide that archive, give them the opportunity to own it as well. And I think, providing the space for that input and ownership and autonomy, and just allowing them to lead and allowing them to curate, allowing them to manage, to project manage, whatever it is, allow Native people to take the reins.
Good, thank you. Ashley?
Yeah, one thing that I often recommend to folks who are new to it is one, find out what tribes are in your area, right? I'll give you a quick story. We had a partnership where we in Nevada, casino gaming is legal. So my tribe has been in the casino business in Nevada. And we had a partner who came in and wanted to make a good impression. And I'm Mojave, right? And so the first thing that he said, non-tribal person, like straight blue collared American, like, you could pick him out of like just a marble commercial, right? The first thing he said was Yate. And we were like, we're not Navajo. But we didn't want to offend him because he had worked really hard on I guess he went on YouTube, found out how to introduce himself in Navajo. And, we're sitting here and we're Mojave and we're like, okay. And so we went through the motion. And so there's going to be a lot of stuff like that. So I think if you just come authentically with who you are, we're not expecting, just like any other partnership, for people to have all of the answers and for you to fix the US government. Like, just that sentence sounds crazy right now in and of itself, right? So if y'all have that solution, then y'all should just follow that path because there needs a lot of help, right? But for us, just being authentic with, hey, I'm new to this position, this is where I'm from, this is what my background is, and I really want to get to know your community. And then really having a checklist of who the leadership people are, right? So if you're working in government, then you know who the president is, you might know who the senators are in your state, you might know who the congress people are. And then it gets a little fuzzy around assembly people and districts and stuff like that. It's the same way in tribal government. So if you're intentional about working with tribes in your area, write a list down of all of the tribes, who their current leaders are, make an introduction, tell them what your office does, and you'll be able to build that trust really quickly.
Thank you. Angelina, we didn't give you much time left, but do you have a quick answer?
Yeah, I think just to quickly piggyback off of you both, I think humility is a really big one. I don't know everything, but neither do you. And I am a firm believer that we're all still learners. And so there's so much more to learn, right? Not everybody knows everything. But I think one thing that has helped me come into a lot of different spaces is being okay with being uncomfortable. There is a lot of harm that has been unrecognized and recognized through our governance and tribal communities. And so really acknowledging the history, I think, is a part of building trust. And so, don't be afraid to avoid the conversations, hold people accountable, really, kind of dig into them a little bit, have them, apologize, right? I think apologizing is, the first step, but then it's the actions after that. Yeah, I'll just keep my answer short.
Good, thank you very much, Miigwech. Cree, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Miigwech, thank you so much. I just want to really take a moment and thank all of our speakers and uplift them today. There was just so much good knowledge shared, so many good stories and personal experiences. And these events really would not be what they are if it wasn't for each and every one of you. So just really appreciate the time you shared with us today, your knowledge, and just all the good energy you brought in. I know many of you said it, but I think it's really something special and something powerful when we're able to gather as Native women leaders and hear from Native women leaders. And so again, just a big thank you to our speakers today. And we also want to say thank you to all of our attendees who were able to join. I'm going to pull up a screen share here once I get a moment. But we do have a survey for today's event. So if you have a moment and can complete that, we would really appreciate it. And apologies to folks if we didn't get to your question in our chat today. We are going to be publishing a guide likely sometime next month, as I mentioned at the beginning of this event. And that will be a written guide about the series overall, which will hopefully address some of those questions that folks had. And really just hope that today inspires you to continue learning more, kind of dig in and maybe start doing that research or start working on those partnerships in your area. And we'll be sharing the recording of this event after today as well. And we'll also send this survey out via Zoom. So I'll post a link in the chat. We have the QR code up here on the slide, but it will also be available in your email later on if you want to answer it that way. And again, just a big thank you to everyone who shared some of their time with us today live. We really enjoy offering these virtual educational sessions and welcome any ideas you have for future ones. So just stay tuned for those future events. You can find more about our webinars and in-person events on our website, which is nativegov.org. And just many blessings to you all today, and thanks for attending this session. I'll just say a quick Giga Wabamin. I hope to see you all soon. And as we close out, just want to offer any space for our speakers if they have any final thoughts. But again, thank you all so very much for joining us today.
I just want to say thank you. And I just listening to everyone that these women are so talented, and I'm very proud and very honored to be a part of this discussion. Miigwech.
And I just want to say thank you. I really enjoyed sharing space today with everyone in the conversation, and I appreciate everyone who shared the time, took the time to listen to us. That was really amazing, and thank you to the center for creating this environment so that we can have these discussions.
I just want to say thank you as well, and so grateful for the opportunity to listen and learn from you all and just sharing and all of that. And also the humor. I love the humor that existed in this conversation. And I'm just, thank you.
I just want to say it's big chimiguets to Native Governance Center for having me again to another event of yours. But also chimiguets to all you ladies as well. I think you guys are all so inspiring, and I hope we do keep in touch. But I think to a big point that I was talking about earlier is our women. Women hold a lot of power, especially in all of our traditional societies. And so, keep doing what you do. And I think all of your words really empowered me today to keep doing the work that I do, even though it is very difficult, especially as a young one. So again, chimiguets to everybody here and also to all of our participants as well.
Thank you all so much. The work you're doing is tough, and so I'm grateful for the humor. I'm grateful for this time we get to share together, and hopefully everybody's leaving with their cup just a little bit more full or ideas for possibilities and some hope for the future. Because while I think many of you said it, there are challenges and things happening. I get so encouraged by just seeing the work being done, the perseverance and kind of the maybe stubbornness sometimes we have in that care for our communities, and just how we want to get things done and we're going to make it happen. Yeah. Chimigwech to you all.